Welcome, everyone. Today is Tuesday, and this is our 56th episode of Let's Do Lunch. Tuesday's topic is always the future of entertainment, and we have a terrific session today, a topic we haven't really covered in the past. But first, let me say thank you to our sponsor. Today's session is sponsored by our friends at Audionamix, whose team has worked on major motion pictures, Grammy-nominated albums, and hit TV shows across the globe. Their revolutionary technology allows content owners to unmix and isolate elements from master recordings. Check them out at audionamix.com. All right, on the panel today, which is going to cover the future of streaming, we have our good friend and colleague Colin Dixon, the Chief Analyst at nScreenMedia, here today to host and moderate the panel. We have Stephen Oliver of Audionamix, and we have Philip Hopkins of Film Detectives. Welcome, gentlemen. Take it away.
Thanks, Ned. My name is Stephen Oliver. I am the Senior Coordinator and Engineer for the Professional Services Division of Audionamix. And Audionamix is the global leader in audio source separation. What that means is we can use our AI-based technology to identify and extract elements from a mix, whether that be dialogue, voice, vocals, music, drums, bass, etc.
Terrific. And Philip.
Thanks, Ned. I'm Phil Hopkins, and I'm the owner of the Film Detective. We're based out of Rockport, Massachusetts. And for the past 20 years, I've been searching the world for crazy sort of movies from the past. We've done a lot of work with people like Mystery Science Theater and Turner Classic Movies, sort of finding unusual films in unusual places. And we've recently delved into the streaming space. We launched our streaming app a couple of years ago, and most recently we've launched a stitched linear channel on several platforms, including Sling TV.
Terrific. So while we're kind of getting Colin back in here, maybe we could just start with, how do you guys work together, and what's the relationship between the two companies?
Well, we haven't worked together before, but we would like to, as we discussed just before this call. We see a lot of potential for a partnership here. We're obviously at Audionamix on the audio side of helping to remonetize and restore classic content by isolating elements that might not exist separately. And Philip, of course, has a different role on the video side there.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Oh, are you back, Colin?
He went down. Sorry. Please, Philip, continue to introduce yourself.
Yeah, we've just done introductions, and if you're ready to jump in, I'll sign off and let you pick it up. It's at this stage, it's just been introduction, so ready for you to jump back in.
Great. Okay, so gentlemen, so you've hopefully you've both introduced your companies and yourselves, and so now why don't we talk about one of the things that I think we've been talking about a lot on the webcasts is how COVID-19 has been affecting your business, and I think it's particularly appropriate here because I've been looking at data that shows people have been shifting away from the news and towards classic content, comfort viewing. So why don't you let us know how that's affecting you? And Steve, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So one data point I wanted to bring up is that we saw that in the first 3 weeks of March, streaming had increased by 85% year over year because people were at home, not going into the office. The kids were home from school. So a huge jump in streaming, and that has continued. It's still about double what it was a year ago at this time. So we're seeing a lot of people watching the streaming platforms. And of course, we also have productions that are currently on hold. We don't have any new productions being shot right now or new programs being created. So that's a huge opportunity for this classic content that might be in some of the studio's back catalogs to revisit that and bring that to the people who are hungry for more content.
Okay, Philip, so how about you? Have you seen a lot of uptick in in the demand for your content?
We have. I mean, ever since COVID sort of changed the landscape of everything, more people have been engaged with watching streaming platforms. And there's so many new platforms. Everyone's sort of chasing an audience right now. So a lot of demand has come our way to fill buckets of content for all the new platforms and some of the older ones, because their engagement has gone way up in the past several months. So yeah, there's a huge demand, and I think with the stress of COVID, I think there's something psychological in terms of comfort zone of acting.
And is there a particular type of content that you see them gravitating towards, Philip? I don't know if you covered this in your intro, but did you mention that you run several channels and services?
Yeah, of course. So within our app, we have numerous categories, and we're seeing everything from classic TV having a huge spike to old westerns. I think escapism, outside of the news cycle, is the highest we've seen the numbers. I mean, we've had spikes as much as 160% over the past 2 months across numerous platforms.
Wow. So that's that is huge. So now we're talking about we're looking to the past to talk about the future, and both of your companies are working on restoring or improving older classic titles to make them more appropriate for the streaming era. And I'd like each of you, if you would, to talk about the process. How do you go about doing this? And perhaps you can talk about a specific thing that you've worked on just recently. And could you sort of walk us through how that works? So, sorry, let's start with you, Stephen.
Sure. So I'm going to use a recent example, which is a personal favorite of mine. We worked on Baywatch last year, and the company behind it, Fremantle, along with Warner Brothers, were bringing an HD remastered version to streaming. I believe it in the US, it's on Amazon Prime. And they were able to restore the footage, and it just looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, along with that, they found that they had some licensed music from the original series that was going to be cost prohibitive for them to extend, to pay for again. So what they wanted to do was replace some of the songs from the original series so that it would be profitable for them to release this to streaming. Now, for the English version, they had all of the stems that they needed. They had a multi-track session, meaning they had a track with the dialogue, a track with the music, a track with the effects. So for that, it was very easy for them to just pull out the music that was there, replace the music, and mix it back together. However, for the foreign versions, such as the French version, the German version, etc., they only had the full composite mix, so stereo track of the dialogue, music, and effects all mixed together. So they didn't think they were going to be able to do it, but we were able to help with our AI technology. So what we were able to do is essentially teach the computer the song that was playing and use our music removal technology to remove that song that was playing in the background, leaving the dialogue and the effects intact. So Warner Brothers would pass us over some files for us to process. We would run them through the algorithm, do a little bit of cleanup on it, and then we would return them to Warner Brothers to be mixed back in. So they were able to replace those songs and make the project cost effective. So yeah, really what we find is with some of the classic content, a lot of times the studios have the materials that they need. They have the music and effects track, they have the dialogue track. But like we saw with Baywatch, a lot of times these things might have gone missing, or they just never existed in the first place. Maybe they were lost, or there was some sort of natural disaster that caused them to lose these archived files. So what we do is we allow them to extract those elements from those full mixes so that they can repurpose them for new applications. So for streaming, we can take dialogue and allow you to mix it into a 5:1 surround mix recreating the music and effects tracks. We can do the music removal, as I mentioned, for Baywatch, to make the project more effective by removing that expensive licensed music. We can also remove dialogue from clips, allowing you to essentially recreate an M&E track and dub that content into new languages, because that's one of the huge things that Netflix and Amazon and the other streaming services have provided to content owners, is the ability to put that content out to a global audience. And for that, you just need to dub it in a new language.
So when you remove that audio, hopefully you guys can hear me again.
Yes. Welcome back.
Yes, thank goodness, thank goodness. So when you do that, that basically allows somebody else. You can now hand that product back, and then they can add the language version on top of that as a completely separate track, in just the same way as you would for a new piece of content, right?
That's exactly right. So yeah, the company gives us the elements, and then we pass it back to their mixers, who do a fantastic job of making everything sound like it came from the same place and putting it back together.
Now, with the music part, could you, and has this happened where they've actually sort of re-recorded the music to the music track itself completely?
Yes, they have done that before. And so what we do is we're able to remove whatever happens to be in there, and we leave the dialogue and effects, and they can just re-record whatever they want to it and replace that. But yeah, there's lots of ways to go about it, and what we find is we just allow people to access content in a different way. Our motto is separate to create, so that's what we do. We separate it and allow others to be creative with the possibilities.
Very good, Phil. I missed your story, I'm afraid, of how you go about the conversion process. But one of the things I wondered, you're dealing with material that is extremely old in some cases. What do you do when there's an unrecoverable part of the video?
Typically with us, we have a network of archives, collectors, friends of the initiative that we go to. So more often than not, we're able to find substitute materials. So if we're missing a reel, if we're missing something in terms of a gap in a film, whether it's from an old SD analog master or whether it's from a foreign version of a film, we've been pretty lucky in terms of tracking down elements. But in terms of deterioration of a movie, that's a whole different can of worms. So with nitrate film, and certainly when film turns to what's called vinegar syndrome, you're chasing kind of a time clock that's running out quickly if it hasn't already expired. So there's different processes of recovering media, and there's different types of machines and scanners that handle the media better than some other machines. So it's really down to the lab and then post-digital software in terms of the restoration, what you can do. But again, you're limited if you're dealing with a piece of nitrate that's pretty much nitrate dust. So we've been fortunate in the fact that post-digital software has improved immensely in the past even 5 years. So things that would have been marginally better 5 years ago are a lot better now with all the sophisticated software tools that we have access to.
Very good. So, during a movie, you might get a dropout or, just one or two frames. You can compensate for that, right?
You can. I mean, with a frame drop or a jump frame, there's certain tricks you can do in editing to make it look smoother and less jarring. And certainly, again, if you have other material that you're able to slide in and sort of discreetly match it with color correction and different tools, most people would never notice those little glitches that, unless you knew that they were there, they would look fairly seamless.
And repairing scratched grains and you know, hairs and stuff like that, that's fairly pedestrian stuff these days, right?
It is and it isn't. I think that when you deal with software, you know, if relying on AI only and not the human being with a set of eyes who's been transferring film for many years, you can overuse it. So I think that, you know, having an experienced editor is always critical, because you got to remember, you know, artificial intelligence is only as good as the person that's programming it. So I've seen films that have actually removed so much information. You're seeing an eyeball removed. You're seeing a clock face in the back with the numbers removed. So you really have to just sort of balance between what you're able to do and what you should do.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up AI, because this is one of the things that I think is so fascinating about what you're doing, Stephen, is how you're using the AI to separate out the dialogue from the audio. I wonder if you could give us a little bit more detail on exactly how that works. How do you train the system to do that? I mean, it sounds tremendously complex.
It absolutely is. And our research and development team in Paris, France, are a bunch of extremely smart guys, way over my head. But to oversimplify things, we use a deep neural network, and we train it by using hundreds or thousands of hours of material. So for dialogue, we feed the computer hours and hours of the human voice, just people speaking. By itself, and then they do something where they combine that with some background noise to see if it can separate it out. So it goes through a training process, at which point you can feed a full mix into it, and it will try to identify and pull out just the dialogue. So we've been refining it over many, many years. The company's been around for maybe 13, 14 years now. And so there's been a great leap forward even in the last couple of years, using the AI-based technology. The results, even compared to a few years ago, are just night and day. It's been an incredible jump.
And there got to be some circumstances where, I mean, I know when I'm listening to dialogue, sometimes the dialogue and the music is almost impossible to separate out. So I imagine that there are some parts that don't get separated out properly. What do you do in those circumstances?
That's a great question. And this goes back to what Phil was saying earlier about, you know, needing that manual touch, needing the human ear or the human eye to review those results. So yeah, it does happen that maybe some dialogue is missing, or maybe there's a little bit of music still in the dialogue track. And that's why we have our team of trained engineers who go through, and we have some proprietary software that we use. And we're able to essentially move the audio information back and forth between the tracks. So if we have a little bit of music in the dialogue track, we can go in and visually almost edit that out and put it back into the music track where it belongs.
Very good. And Phil, I don't know if you covered this in your description of your process, but I would think the most important things that you need to get right is the setting on the encoder. So can you talk about some of the things that, some of the ways that you can tweak the encoder to do a better job on the particular piece of content that you're looking at to convert?
Yeah, so I mean, the encoder is one thing, but you know, really the source is the most important thing. So when
the most important, yeah.
Dealing with the film itself and the resolution of what you're going after. So, you know, we've gone through so many iterations now between HD and 2K and 4K and 6K. So in terms of extrapolating the data and the information off the film, how you're doing that and the process that is involved with taking that information is the most important part of the entire process, because you know, you're getting the most resolution off of your original, or as close to the original that you've been able to obtain. So that's really the starting point, is kind of your data that you're extracting from the film. And once you have, whether it be a DPX file or a ProRes file that you're working in post-digital restoration, that's when all the bells and whistles happen in terms of the scratch removal, the audio restoration, and then your final process of encoding that media file. But the critical part is who's handling the film, who's fixing sprocket damage, and who's taking care of, all of the physical sides of the restoration first before you actually get to the post-digital.
Very good. And typically, how long does this process take? So you've found a source that you want to convert, you want to digitize. From finding that source, I guess one of the longest legs is finding a really good copy of the source, or the best copy that you can get. But once you have that, how long does it actually take you to do the conversion, and so that it's ready to put up and for us to watch it?
So depending on what we're doing in terms of the film length and the resolution that we're capturing, it can take a couple of days. And then after we get the proxy file back into QC, then it's evaluated in terms of what does it need for audio restoration, for color grading, for all sorts of other issues, like dust busting, scratch removal. There's a whole grading that happens during that evaluation process. And, if you're going through a major motion picture like Casablanca or Gone with the Wind or The Wizard of Oz, you're going to spend a small fortune, and you're going to spend months, if not years, on it. But for our workflow, typically we're looking between a week to 2 weeks from start to finish.
Stephen, same for you? Is that about the right length of time?
Yeah, it can vary depending on the project, depending on the length of the film, depending on exactly what we're working on, how it was mixed, and what process we're using. Normally, running it through the algorithm only takes maybe 20 to 30 minutes for a full-length feature, but then we have to go through the manual process of checking that and making sure everything sounds good. And depending on how that comes out, the cleanup can take 1 to 2 weeks, depending on, again, what the end result is.
And, I was thinking about this last night after we chatted yesterday. It seems to me that your Audionamix really allows people to release content that they might not have been able to release before because of licensing restrictions on music and stuff like that. Is that the case? Is people using you to help remove maybe a piece of music that they can't secure a license for and they want to replace or just eliminate?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually one of the major projects that we've worked on throughout the years, that type of project, rather. We've done that for probably dozens of TV shows and movies where that exact situation came up. It's just too expensive to license that music, and they need to pull it out. And without the separate tracks, we're able to help them remove that music from the full composite mix, and they can replace it. So yes, absolutely. And with the dialogue isolation, dialogue removal services as well, we can help a lot of people bring their content into the modern age.
Very good. So, very good. So, sorry, I just continue to have problems here with my technology. Could you? I think it might be interesting if you could talk about some of your more recent projects. If there's a recent project and something you're working on right now, could you tell us a little bit about what that is and what some of the particular challenges are? And perhaps we can start with you, Phil, on this one.
Sure. So we're working on a pre-code film that we have recently restored called The Sin of Nora Moran. And it was an independently made feature film from 1933. And it was going to be screened this year at the Turner Classic Film Festival. And sadly, that was canceled. However, it did air on their network, and we're also releasing it on Blu-ray in a few weeks. But when we worked with the original print that UCLA had actually preserved, my colleague Sam Sherman, who is the owner of the film property, was able to work with UCLA about a decade ago, making a preservation print off the original 35 nitrate negative. And that was wonderful, but when they actually made the optical track, the audio was atrocious. So, you know, even though they had a beautiful 35 print, we had very poor audio. So thankfully, Sam had a television print, which was on 16 millimeter, and we were able to extract the audio, sync it up with the 35, and replace it to make a far better soundtrack. So I think one of the big problems with restoration is that a lot of people overlook how important the audio side to a film is, and they overspend on the visual. And then when you're watching it back and you're listening to crappy audio, you say, you know, wow, they did a great job in the picture, but they really missed the boat on the sound. So, you know, that's a critical part to the restoration. And we were lucky that we had a backup source for it.
And are there, I mean, 4K is the latest format. Is some of this really older library content, is that appropriate to upgrade to 4K? How does it look when it's upgraded to that resolution?
Looks stunning. It looks probably better than when it was originally screened. I mean, the resolution of 4K, you're getting full resolution, especially if you're able to obtain the camera negative or something close to that was maybe 2 or 3 generations away. It just looks astonishingly better. And the aesthetic of the film and watching it, something that might have been, you know, kind of a common film that you might have not cared that much about, when you see something in 4K that's restored, it's like seeing it for the first time. So I've seen films that I've been marginally a fan of restored, and it's mind-blowing how different they are in terms of the presentation.
You've just it's made you an even bigger fan of the movie. That's fascinating. Stephen, I got the same sort of question for you. You know, obviously taking something that was recorded in mono, is it possible to re-record or to bring that up to a 5.1 or even something as advanced as Dolby Atmos? But what's the cutoff? Do you need at least stereo?
We've actually worked with mono files before in terms of music as well as films, because the AI can isolate the dialogue, and also it can separate out different musical elements. So although we don't do the upmixing ourselves, we can separate as many elements as we can and pass those back to the mixers to do that work. One example of that, we did a project for the Blues Brothers for an anniversary Blu-ray that came out a few years ago. And what we did there is they were upmixing that into 5.1. For the foreign versions, similar to Baywatch, they didn't have the separate elements, the separate stems. They just had the full mix. So what we were able to do for them is to isolate the dialogue from those foreign versions so that they could recreate the music and effects tracks themselves in 5.1 and then layer that dialogue on top of that. So we were able to do that for several foreign languages for them, so they could use the same 5.1 M&E and then just drop in the appropriate language.
And I'm thinking one of the things that is probably missing from many of the library titles that you are handed is closed captioning. Are you able to, you know, create closed captioning and add that as well? And tell us about that process. How does that work?
So that is something that we've worked with, and we are working with partners right now, people who are in the closed captioning space, because the way that would work is we would use our technology to isolate the dialogue from the film or TV show, and then they could run it through their closed captioning system and have a better result. So we found that it improves the quality of the closed captioning system quite a bit because it's isolating the dialogue from everything else behind it. So it's a little more accurate when they run it through their system.
Right, I would think that some of those older movies and shows are quite difficult to do that. So you probably need to do that enhancement before you can do it. I just want to remind everybody, please enter your questions in the Q&A window. I won't see them if they're in the chat window, and we're about to get to the Q&A. So before we do that, I think I wanted to pitch one more question to you, Phil. With your services, how do you go to talk a little bit about programming those services with the movies that you have? Because it really is a pretty unique collection of content, right?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of our collection, it's pretty vast. And unlike, say, Warner Brothers or MGM, we're pulling from a real mixed bag of movies. So everything from old 1920s silent films to older kind of pre-code movies, all the way up through classic TV of the 50s, and then even into 70s made-for-TV movies and cult movies, horror movies. So we try to look at it in terms of if we're offering the content as just a library offering, it's pretty much a big kitchen. So whether the end user wants to license Western movies from us or television shows, then we have a vast, deep collection. But in terms of how we program our network and our linear channel, it's just like a traditional cable network. We have a programming meeting every week. We go through themes. And like right now, we're in our June Back to the Drive-In theme. And we've got all these Friday night double features, a lot of old Roger Corman movies. And we've even programmed in some of the old drive-in theater interstitials with the dancing hot dog and let's go to the refreshment stand. So with COVID, I think that we're kind of celebrating, the drive-in movie theater experience because people are actually still able to go to the movies and go to the drive-ins if they're lucky enough to have one. But we're celebrating drive-in movies right now. And so every month we have a different theme. We have a sort of star of the month, the birthday celebration, and we try to keep it fresh because what we have learned is that the old kind of static menu and the content not changing every month, you're going to lose your engagement pretty quickly unless you're fully.
Yeah, programming is so important. So we're getting towards the Q&A section. So actually, Laura, if you could put the poll up, that would be awesome. There it is, and hopefully my network stays up long enough for me to see the results. So while we chat through some of the questions, please go ahead and fill out that poll, and we'll review them. The questions in the end. So I wanted to pitch a question now to both of you. One of the things that we often forget is that the older movies and older shows, they come with very little metadata. And metadata is the reason things can be discovered, right? So you need to have the advanced metadata. So of you about that aspect of metadata. And Stephen, I can't think of anything that's more important than the dialogue to the metadata. So could you talk to that for a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, most of these things don't have any metadata associated with them. So really what our technology is doing is just, again, listening for that dialogue through the algorithm, and it's able to pull that out even without any kind of indications of where it starts, where it stops, time code, things like that. So that's where we really rely on the folks at the studios and the post-production mixers to be able to layer that stuff back in. Now we use a Pro Tools session when we do it, so we take the original, we run it through the system, and then we pop it back into the session. So we make sure it lines up correctly, but really we rely on our partners at the post-production facilities to manage that type of data and get these things where they need to be.
Very good. And Phil, metadata.
You live and die by it. In terms of what we do with the metadata, it's hypercritical because all of our third-party platform partners, they have their own templates, and whether it's an XML that we're having to fill out and cite other sources like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, you have to build your mezzanine around what you have. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be delivering to many platforms and monetizing your library anytime soon. So we really have good metadata. We have an editorial team that digs in to get it correct. And then we also work with several stock houses in terms of photos and movie posters, and even making our own if they don't exist. So that's really, as much as we love to restore the movies, without the metadata, those movies are not going to get distributed very quickly.
Very good. And actually, one question that's come in about ads. A lot of the content, a lot of the older shows, I'm just wondering what happens with the ads. Some may come to you with ads built in. How do you deal with that? And how do you maintain the ad tags? So we haven't really talked about that aspect. Stephen, is that something that you've encountered in your business?
No, again, we're usually just past the audio information that we need to work with from the post facility. So they're taking care of all of that on their side and typically just delivering us a mono or stereo wave file, which we then run through and we send it back to them. So we don't really deal with that side of things.
Very good. And Phil, have you restored any old ads?
I love when we get old television prints that have original ads in there. In fact, we have a great collection of ads, many of which would never be able to be shown again for obvious reasons, because you can't advertise the tobacco industry any longer. And so much of what was on television was based on tobacco and alcohol or old-fashioned beer commercials from people like Buster Keaton or the Three Stooges or even the Flintstones promoting cigarettes.
Wow. They will be novelty, I think, novelty to see that stuff. So I think we're just about out of time. If we can put the poll, take the poll down, and then if we could take a quick look at the poll results, that would be awesome. Okay, so I asked in the last 2 months, have you watched any classic movies or TV shows? And, well, it looks like very few people haven't. Only a quarter of people say they haven't. And most, they seem to be watching a lot more. So I guess this is good for both of your businesses, right?
Yes.
In the last 2 months, have you rented a movie or TV show? Wow. Only a quarter say they haven't. That's actually a bit of a surprise, because I've been tracking that data, and it really seems like renting is going out of fashion these days, but it looks like most people have. And at least a quarter, a little bit more than a quarter, say they're renting classic and recent titles. So again, something that seems to indicate the high demand that you're seeing for your services isn't going to ratchet down anytime soon, gentlemen. And in 2019, did you go to the movie theater? And yes, most people seem to go for recent titles. Yes, about fifth went for recent and classic titles. Wow, only 7% say they didn't go. That's quite a surprise. I know the last movie I went to see, I think, was a showing of Casablanca. Which I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your great information on restoring these older shows to great digital quality for the new services. And Ned, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Colin, and everyone. I know it's difficult sometimes when the technology does not cooperate, but I appreciate you guys, Stephen, Philip, Colin, all making it work, and everyone who's participated today. Thanks again to our friends at Audionamix for sponsoring the session here today. Tomorrow, we have our Business of Games David Green will be back with the head of Galaxy Interactive, one of the top venture capital funds in the space. So have a great day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.